I am seeing some wonderful, wonderful questions. So I am going to start actually with Catherine. So Catherine, I do see yours, and it is directed towards Mike. What is your present position on fracking in PA?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was looking at the question. Present position. It's not stopping. We're not going to be able to stop it. We should tax and regulate it, especially given the really piss poor state of the way that we actually fund the Department of Environmental Protections. One of the things that I've actually heard over and over again, and it's interesting because it's come both from environmental advocates and from engineering firms we've developed some relationships with, is that every region of the state handles things differently. That is largely a result of the fact that we don't have the money to cover any of it. So if I had a magic wand, a more realistic wand, I tried to figure out a way that we could better tax and regulate the system. The governor came out with his proposal again today to try to, seventh time's the charm, to try to tax Marcellus shale. That's something he's going to try to do. I candidly don't think he's going to have much success with it, but I think it's important we continue that fight because we have to get there eventually.
Okay. Thank you. Next question. We had Catherine, you are just rolling the questions. I love it. So are you, Pete, and you, Mike, joining with other legislators, mostly Republicans, to challenge the opening rule agreement you are all supposed to sign onto that keeps your desired legislation from coming up from votes? And Catherine, if you feel that I have missed something, you can take yourself off of mute and ask.
I know what you mean, Catherine. And I can answer that. No, because it's not a fight that's even remotely winnable. The rules were written by the majority. Republicans have a 112 to 90 majority. There's one vacancy that will be filled by a Republican, so it's getting to get to 113 to 90. If the Republicans decide that they don't want to open the rules, there is less than zero chance that the rules are going to be open. I would rather spend my time fighting on things that I think we can actually win broad-based support for, and then eventually not only either win the legislative fight or win the political one. When you say to suburbanite in Montgomery County who's had a nice friendly Republican legislator, well, he does my property tax rent rebate form, that they voted for a rules change that made it harder to get votes out of committee, their eyes glaze over and they fall asleep. When you say to them, they voted against taxing Marcellus shale and that's the reason your property taxes are so high, then you get some. So I get it, the rules suck. There's no two ways about it, but there is less than zero chance that we ever win a rules fight with 13 votes shy of a majority. Terrible answer, but it's an accurate one.
23 votes shy of a majority.
I'm sorry. Yeah, right.
Yeah. And if I can chime in there, from all my time working in the legislature, I worked for the legislature for 11 years, and I've completed 6. I'm in my 7th year. So of those 17 years of being a member, either staff or a member of the General Assembly, I have worked in the majority for all of 4 years. So for the better part of 13 years of my 17-year career in the Pennsylvania legislature has always been in the minority. Frustrating as that may be, it is what it is. And in order for us to actually effectively govern, I don't care if we're talking about environmental issues, education issues, economic development, criminal justice reform, no matter what we're talking about, there is a skill and there is a different way that you have to govern when you are a member of the minority party. Yes, we are fighting the big structural battles, like we fought with the rules, like right now we're fighting battles on whether or not legislators have to wear masks in what is the petri dish known as the floor of the Pennsylvania State House. And so we are fighting some of those bigger battles. We're fighting bigger battles on redistricting reform, and I could go right down the line. But at the end of the day, in order for us to make tomorrow better than today, we have to learn how to govern, for lack of a better term, creatively or slyly, which means we have to find new and smarter ways to be able to move the needle forward on key issues. I mentioned this briefly in my opening when we talked about low impact hydro. I will never get a low impact hydro bill passed just by putting a co-sponsorship memo out there and saying, let's do it. But if we are able to move on changes on AEPS, the Alternative Energy Portfolio Standards, which frankly I think needs a refresh, or if we move a budget bill that has environmental stuff, I might be able to get enough support to slip it in as an amendment, or even as just as a written part of an omnibus bill. That is how we're going to be able to move the needle forward while we continue to fight the fights every other November, to try to change the makeup of the legislature. So we can have those big philosophical fights, those fights about process, and they are vitally important. I sit next to Bob Freeman on the floor of the House, and 2 seats away from Steve Samuelson, 2 of the biggest advocates for structural change of the legislature. I agree with them on virtually everything they want to do, but I'm also not going to wait to try to move the needle, even if it's just a degree or two, while we're in those other fights. I think that's probably the best way I could answer that question.
Thank you. Thank you, folks. And don't worry, I have questions that were sent via email, so I'm going to try to get to as many as possible. We have one from Susan. Her question regards House Bill 110, which is about forestry legislation. So the people who are meeting seem to all be connected with the forestry industry, either acquiring the lumber or using the lumber. Why are no environmentalists represented? This resource belongs to us, the citizens of the state.
Maria, can you repeat the first part? I missed that. I'm sorry.
So Susan's question is around House Bill 110, which is the forestry legislation. So her concern is that the people connected to it all seem to be from the forestry industry, either
Probably
taking
are.
the lumber or using it. But her biggest concern is, why are environmentalists represented? It seems like this is a resource or belongs to us all, so why aren't we presented the same? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I just missed the first part. I just did a quick Google. The bill is sponsored by Representative Marty Causer.
Mike, I'm doing the same thing. I'm pulling it up as we speak.
Yeah. One of the benefits of Zoom
Susan, you
meetings. Yeah, and the answer is because they don't like the environment. Like there's and this is one of the bills that I'm sure we would wind up opposing for that reason. I'm looking at it right now. There's 21 co-sponsors. 19 of them are Republicans, although actually one of them is a pretty liberal Democrat who chairs the Agricultural Committee. That's something I'd keep an eye on. Roll call. Hang on a sec. Let me see the votes. You know what? That's interesting. This one, I take that back, because this one passed unanimously, with yes votes coming from some flamingly liberal people, Pete, including guys like Chris Rabb. So it can't be that bad, whatever it is. Now, I don't know anything about it. I'd need to take a closer look at it. But just judging by who the yes votes are, including, again, flamingly liberal people here, I have a hard time imagining.
Emily Kincaid, yeah.
Yeah, these are not blue dog conservative. No. Chris Rabb drives a Volt. Like I don't so I'd want to know more about it before I said anything better about it.
I certainly appreciate that one. Susan, you gave us you threw us for a little bit of a curveball, but I like it.
No, I appreciate Googling. That's all right.
Hey, me too. I love it. Okay, so this one is directed for Pete. How do you define low impact hydroelectric power? Would this cause more free-flowing streams to have new dam construction?
Excellent question. The legislation that we're looking at would create a pilot program for the construction of 3 low impact hydro plants to be built in canals. 1 in the old canal in Lehigh, and 2 in Allentown, and 2 in Easton. They would touch upon 2 different electric distribution EDCs, electric distribution companies. The Allentown one is PPL. The 2 in Easton are part of First Energy, and so they're not owned by those corporations, but that's the utility that would distribute them. So both of them would be, all 3 of them would be built in canals, not in streams. And we're looking to do it as a pilot program first, to kind of see where it goes. Right now, those low impact hydro plants that are 50 to 100 megawatt, not, or kilowatt, excuse me, not gigantic dams are actually allowed to be built, but according to the PUC. But I'm going to get kind of nerdy here, but that's, I think, what the whole point of this conversation is. Right now, they can only sell their electricity directly to an end user within a 2-mile radius of the plant. Anything that's beyond that, it has to go into the General Electric grid through PJM. The minute you start going into PJM, their cost gets prohibitive and it's never going to be bought. Therefore, nobody's buying the power from these small plants. If you do a direct sale to, for example, a university or a major hospital network or a large scale municipal government, then all of a sudden what you're doing is you're giving them a direct market and they're able to do that. What we want to be able to do is take that 2 mile radius from a 2 mile radius. And I mean, my goal is 10, but I'll take 5 right now. All 3 of these would be commercially viable if we gave them a 5 mile or 7 mile radius. So that's what we're trying to do. Again, these are very small steps, but they're steps that are going to take more and more people off of the PJM grid, making it more and more less and less likely that they're going to be relying on fossil fuels. I hope that gives you an idea of sort of the perspective I'm going at. Again, we're just trying to get it to prove that it works in PA before we take it a step further.
Very good. Okay, now that's awesome. I have one question geared towards both. What do you hear in talks with representatives stuck in with pro-fossil fuel stances? Is it a firm ideology or denial of climate reality, or is it disingenuous and driven by special interest?
The answer, I think, is yes.
Depends on the legislator.
Yeah, it really does. But I think by and large, the answer actually is yes. One of the things that's been really striking this term is how disconnected some of the folks on the other side of the aisle are from reality. Now, we do have Democrats that I really disagree with on climate-related issues. In fact, as Pete knows, I got into an argument with one of them today on a Signal text thread.
Yeah.
About the Marcellus. No, I'm serious. I'm not going to talk about who, but
we're getting all the details.
A good friend of mine who's a more conservative Democrat was saying how stupid it is that the governor is once again proposing a tax that's going to kill jobs. And I was saying, I get completely why he's doing it. I think it's unrealistic, but he's got to push for it. It's the right thing from the progressive end of the party. And it was a funny conversation. So it's funny that comes up. Some people genuinely are representing the interests of their district. So you have people who still have a deep connection to the oil or gas industry. They are not evil. They're not wrong. They just come with a very, very different perspective. And I can guarantee that if a good chunk of my district was employed by a particular industry, I would feel the same way. However, there are also Republicans who I think go, and I'll say that's Republicans, who are really just in sheer denial of reality. The greatest threat that we have to the body politic right now is that there's a disconnection between what's actually happening in the real universe and what's happening in these guys' heads. You know, they live in the Fox News bubble, right? Where COVID really isn't that bad because Donald Trump says so, and he survived COVID, therefore I can survive COVID. Never mind, it might kill your mother. So 30 of them, and that's a count from our leader on Monday on the floor, 30 of them were not wearing masks. And one of them in the newspaper, when asked about it, compared wearing masks to leeches. These are the same people who don't believe that climate change is real, that don't believe that lead in public buildings is bad. Like, this is the environment we work in. And again, just to reiterate, Pete and I are in the minority. The fact that I haven't gone completely insane and blogged about it is nothing short of a miracle. Like, that's just, the answer to the question, though, is yes, it's everything.
Schlossberg's MySpace account is absolutely hysterical.
So angry when I type.
But what was really crazy when he took it to Parler. That got awkward real quick.
Wait till I go on Gab. That's gonna get it. Hi, Schlossberg. Oh, on Gab.
That ends poorly, Mike. I wouldn't do that. I think we have conservative. I'm going to speak for conservative Democrats right now. I am not a conservative Democrat. I don't pretend to be a conservative Democrat, but I have friends who are conservative Democrats. And those conservative Democrats are people who generally live in areas, like Mike said, that have large industries built around it that are employing folks, or pumping money into the school districts, or what have you. There is a bit of an echo chamber in anything that we do, right? So like when I'm talking to, say, for example, the community solar advocates, and we're talking about its impact on environmental justice, on potentially reducing our greenhouse emissions, when I'm talking to them about economic development, and we're just talking in a big circle about all the millions of reasons why this is the right thing to do, and we don't understand why people don't agree with us. The same thing happens in those circles. So sometimes those donors are the same people that are providing them with either information, whether it's accurate or misinformation, and they're hearing from the, you know, the pipe worker who lives down the street, and they run into each other at, you know, the kids' little league game. Like, all of that stuff matters. One of the challenges with governing in a state that is as big and diverse as Pennsylvania is that there's a lot of silos, there's a lot of bubbles. One thing that we've really tried to do, and now Congresswoman Madeline Dean, but when she was in the State House, she really led the charge on this, was trying to bring together some of those different factions through the Blue-Green Alliance. It was a really important way for us to try to take those kind of conservative areas of Pennsylvania and those more progressive areas of Pennsylvania and figure out where we can work together to try to advocate and support policies that are ultimately good for both, you know, blue collar workers and people that are concerned about the environment. Just Monday, I went to the Central PA Building Trades meeting. Now, here in the Lehigh Valley, we have our own building trades, speak to them on a regular basis. This is the first time I've gone outside of the Lehigh Valley to talk to a bunch of union pipe fitters, union electrical workers, union laborers, and those sorts of folks. And these are people that are, generally speaking, rock solid Democrats who lean conservative in their own personal views on things. And by the end of the conversation, what they were all telling me is that they all generally support the ideas of moving away from fossil fuels as much as they can. Now, they were doing it on a different timeline than perhaps I'd like to, but at the very least, those conversations do happen. And the only way that we're going to be effective in moving the needle forward on this issue is trying to, again, find the common language between those different silos, those different bubbles in Pennsylvania.
Absolutely. No, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. I have a very good academic one. So there is a question asked about ethylene oxide, or ETO, a chemical used all over the valley to clean and sterilize in medical and other settings. It is a carcinogen and emits to the air. There is a national environmental law firm organizing about it in the valley. Were you aware of this?
I heard that it was happening. I remember giving a couple of interviews to the Old Morning Call reporter. This was the Bebron story, if I'm not mistaken. I do remember it.
Northwood Boulevard, off of
Right, right. I didn't get a ton involved in it because I hadn't heard any. The cancer rates within East Allentown, which was closest to it, weren't really elevated, so it wasn't something that I really caught a ton of. But like, I know it's happening. Beyond that, I'm not sure about anything else. And I know, and with one addition, and again, we spoke with Department of Environmental Protection when it came out, and they did say there were different regulatory things that they were looking to do to crack down on it. So that much I got out of DEP.
Yeah, we had conversations with them when the issue first started coming up. But in terms of collective action or anything locally, frankly, I haven't heard a thing. So if there are people that are organizing around it, certainly willing to have conversations with them, but nobody's reached out to me at this point in time. That plant, that factory, if I recall correctly, is actually in Hanover Township, Lehigh County, which matters because there's a Hanover Township, Northampton County, and they're two different municipalities, which is Representative Jeannie McNeil's district. So it's possible she knows more about it than I do, and she's been more engaged on the matter. But I'm tangentially aware of it.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. And I had a Deidre, I could see that she could not join us, but she had a question about, or rather a concern about, the poor quality of drinking water or bathing water as she saw fit in her community living in inner city Allentown. So thoughts on that? Probably more to Schweyer.
I mean, I grew up in 10th and Shoe. I don't really have really many thoughts on that. I guess, in terms of who's ultimately responsible for our immediate drinking and bathing water in the city of Allentown, it's Lehigh County Authority, which of course is a publicly held board through that is responsible to the Lehigh County Board of Commissioners, but they have their own independent board. So they would be the ones that are immediately responsible. I am unaware. No, literally nobody's contacted me once about concerns about dirty bathing water in downtown. What I will say is that there was a report a few years ago. Now we're going back 4 or 5 years about lead in the water, mostly at Allen High School. I think that was the only place that they really tested that. But that's going back a ways, and it was exactly one report that did that. So I'm still confused or unsure about where we're at. So the short answer is I'm unaware of anything. Now, if there is something that the Department of Environmental Protection needs to be interested in, or at least be alerted to, and potentially do a review of, I'm certainly happy to bring them in. But I've not heard of anything.
Okay, thank you for that one. So I have one actually bring up your interest in community solar. So how can we help to bring the community solar bill across the finish line?
Wow. Thank you for that. Tinku, I'm assuming you asked this question.
Yeah.
I think you sent me that as a direct message as well. Okay, so fundamentally, we've actually already made progress on moving it forward a little bit this year, because the Republicans changed their chairman. And I like to say this about politics: if you have a good plumber or a bad plumber, that matters, right? Just because they both have the word plumber behind their name doesn't mean that person is inherently good at being a plumber, right? Legislators are the same way. There are legislators that are really good at the job and legislators that are really bad at the job. And sometimes I agree with legislators that are actually bad at the job, but politically I agree with them. And sometimes there's people that I think are wrong. I would disagree with them on the color of grass, but I know that they know how to work within the confines of the legislature, and they are interested in doing things. We changed, that matters, because we changed our chairman in the Consumer Affairs Committee. Let me rephrase. The Republicans changed their chairman in Consumer Affairs from a guy who had never served on a committee before, and who, candidly, to call him lazy would be an insult to lazy people everywhere. And Katie's laughing because she knows exactly who I'm talking about here. To somebody who, while not an environmentalist, is a legislator who cares about the legislative process and has already demonstrated a willingness to start looking at and really getting his hands dirty on issues in that committee. That makes me optimistic that we might have a chance, at the very least, some hearings on the matter. There are a couple of the biggest hang up with community solar, as far as I can tell, is really one thing and one thing only. And that's how much it's going to cost, or how much money it potentially could take out of the maintenance of the electric grid. So let me try to rephrase it this way. Electric cars don't pay a gas tax, yet we fund our roads and bridges with a tax at the pump. So if nobody's driving cars that have fossil fuels anymore, we currently don't have a way to pay for our roads and bridges in Pennsylvania. Mike, you served on transportation. That's correct, right?
Yep.
Community solar is the same concern. And frankly, that low impact hydro that we talked about before is the exact same concern. If, as the bill is written, it takes all of the funding out that would normally go to keeping up and maintaining our energy grid, just like the gas tax is used to maintain our surface grid. And so what we're going to need to do is we need to be able to have an honest conversation about how we're going to help subsidize the development of community solar in a way that doesn't take money out of our grid. So it's a long answer. It's a wonky answer, but these issues are extraordinarily detailed and wonky. So there's a dollar figure here about trying to figure out how we can get community solar passed in a manner that doesn't pull out our grids, because we certainly don't want to take money out of a safe, secure, and frankly, invest in our grid, because we know we lose electricity in a grid, which ultimately hurts our carbon emissions when we're buying from particularly gas plants. So there's a dollar figure there that we just haven't figured out yet, at least in Pennsylvania. I think that gets to it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Before I go forward, Schlossberg, would you like to add anything to community solar?
Frankly, no, that's Pete's bag. He knows it infinite. There's nothing intelligent I could add.
You said it so eloquently. There's just there you go.
The most intelligent thing Mike has ever said is, Pete's good. Go do that. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate you.
There you go. We trust it. All right. So is there anyone aware of a good resource on opportunities to increase union jobs in the green economy in the Lehigh Valley?
So that we've had these conversations like one-on-one with our building trades folks, but I can't think of any like resource or directory they're in. Pete, maybe you know this one better than me.
So I'm gonna try to answer it this way. I think I don't think there's one particular thing. I think there's an all of the above. I think we need to do a better job at our Career and Technical Institute of training for people for the new economy. Right now, Cabot Oil and Gas, for example, helps fund trades jobs at LCTI through a tax credit program. They literally buy tools. It's great for the kids. They literally buy tools for kids so that when they graduate from LCTI, they have a full toolkit to be able to go in there.
And Pete, can you just explain to folks, because I know what LTCI is, but maybe our folks who don't have that program, what that does for high school students and why that would be a good opportunity for, green energy.
Yeah, absolutely. So Lehigh Career and Technical Institute is our VOTEC in Lehigh County. And so if you're a high school student and you're not necessarily going towards a path of college, it's an outstanding way for you to get early apprenticeship jobs, and frankly, their curriculum, if anything, might be a little bit too big. I mean, they have culinary arts, they have hair and beauty education, they have early childhood education, they have logistics education. But
they're really amazing.
It's a remarkable program. But they also have electrical engineering and welding and plumbing and carpentry and all of those sorts of things. There are tax credit programs that we utilize for good all over the Lehigh Valley. A corporation will invest in a tax credit program. That tax credit goes to kids to help them with stuff outside. PPL is a huge investor in the EITC program. For example, Air Products invests in EITC. So Cabot Oil and Gas Company takes advantage of this tax credit and they put money into our career and technical programs. And so instead of, insert name of solar developer here or other programs that are getting a leg up and building those relationships with those 17, 18, 19-year-olds who are stepping into a career into a career of electrical work, for example, they're hearing first from Cabot. So that might be an opportunity for us to build relationships with the younger generation who, quite frankly, are far more concerned about environmental concerns than people that are, on the tail end of their professional careers. And that's a way. Also, I will say our building trades are interested. I find that the overwhelming majority of our trades, maybe not so much the pipe fitters, but certainly electrical workers, concrete workers, asbestos removal folks, all of those folks, they're neutral on where their jobs come from. They just want the job. It's very simple. So when we are able to produce, good electrical jobs, for example, for our IBEW, they pounce all over it. They're not anti-green opportunities. So maybe what we really should do is build that relation, try to bring hearings here to the Lehigh Valley if that alliance starts kicking back up again. It's a really good idea.
And just very briefly, let me add to something Pete just said, and I think unintentionally alluded to. One of the great challenges to the progressive movement right now is holding the entire coalition together, particularly in terms of the widening chasm between organized labor and the environment. Republicans very successfully exploited that gap on at least 2 occasions, to the point that we were getting angry text messages from unions based on our votes in a couple of instances. One of being
Reggie,
somewhat different. Say again?
Reggie, for example.
Yeah, Reggie's one of them. But there was the tax credit one, the one of coming to a nice or a halfway decent compromise at least. But again, you know, this is one of the challenges with being in the minority is the Republicans control the agenda and they can make you put up votes that's going to piss off one side or the other. And that's a long-term challenge. And the argument that I said, you know, I voted both ways on that compromise, candidly. And what I've said to both sides is the only way we get through this is by coming to the majority. We need your space and your patience in order to get in the majority. And that may mean putting up painful, difficult votes at the moment. But if the progressive coalition fractures, we're not getting there together. And then we're always going to be in the minority, always going to be on the defensive and never have a chance to do any good.
Very good. Well, listen, thank you. And I love the idea of Pete, I do love the idea of LTCI and starting them young, just starting that infrastructure at a young age. So I do appreciate that. So I just want to, because we have so many good questions, so I want to just slowly just wrap a few things up. So I want to take a step back because some folks have questions about the basic legislative steps for folks that want to better understand the process.
Mm-hmm.
So just a few other questions about the legislative process. What do these phrases mean? What does it mean to lay a bill on the table? What does it mean to remove a bill from the table? What is the best way to have an effect? Those are sent to committees. Should we contact members of those committees? So I will repeat
Mike, you're in leadership, man. Take it away.
Lay a bill on the table and remove a bill from the table is just, it's a technical parliamentary terms. A bill laid on the table means the bill is not moving at the moment. Removing the bill on the table means that some sort of legislative action is going to happen, like a vote or an assignment to a committee. The best way to have an effect is to personally write, call, or meet with your legislator and your legislator only. Feel free to email people who are on a committee. However, I can tell you whenever I get an email from someone not in my legislative district, it winds up right in the trash. And I guarantee every other legislator feels the exact same way, unless they want to make a trolling response, which every now and then I've done. We got a ton of Stop the Steal emails, and I had some fun with some of those responses. But like, if you actually value your time, should you email somebody that's not your representative or senator? No, it will accomplish absolutely nothing.
I'll just say, I instead of your member, I would say your region, right? Like if I get something from somebody from Bethlehem, I'm going to look at it more than I will somebody from Moon Township. But Mike's right. But even if you're not on the committee, you still have influence.
Yeah.
Like Mike and I have never served on a committee together, not once. We do that deliberately. Jeannie McNeil and I have never served on a committee together. We do that deliberately, the three of us, so that the three of us, before Mike was in leadership, now as a member of leadership, Mike no longer serves on committees. But prior to his elevation to a member of our leadership team, Mike, Jeannie, and I served on 11, 12, 13, 14 committees between the three of us, and we never overlapped once. But Jeannie's my roommate in Harrisburg. I mean, Mike and I have been friends for 15, 18 years, which might explain his blogging and inside joke. But even if I didn't serve, I never served on transportation committee, but if I had a transportation question, yeah, I'd call my buddy Mike and be like, hey, am I reading this right? Is there something going on? Or is there any update that you can give me? So even if your member is not a member of the Environmental and Energy Committee or the Consumer Affairs Committee or the Transportation Committee, and by the way, there is a major environmental issue coming that we have to address this year. That's a transportation one about mass transit. Even if your specific member isn't, I guarantee you they're friends with people that are on that committee, and they still have that indirect influence over them. It's great to put a bug in somebody's head. Hey, Mike, I'm getting a ton of calls about transportation. You know, when you're on the transportation committee, you think we're going to be able to get anywhere on mass transit? Mike would be like, well, maybe not this year, but I think we're going to get there next year. And we would have those conversations, and then I can more intelligently respond to my constituents. So your member is your point of contact, and they have relationships with folks. Now they could be ornery. You may not like them. You may not agree with them. And that's a legitimate thing. And remember, there's always a House member and a senator, and you can always go both routes.
One of the interesting things that Pete and I will do, we will compare notes about broad-based issues, and it's interesting because despite our districts obviously abut each other, there's places in the city of Allentown where if you're on the north side of the street, you're in my district, you're on the south side, you're in Pete's. But it's interesting the different flavors that we get, especially like what issues we hear about louder. And one of the most enjoyable things that we do, and Pete and I were just doing this on the floor the other day, is comparing notes with colleagues from around the state about issues. For example, speaking broadly about vaccines, Pete and I have come to the same conclusion that we think that Allentown and the Lehigh Valley is significantly better positioned than other areas of the state, because of the two health networks and the Allentown Health Bureau. That has led to, I can't understate how much luckier we are than some of our colleagues. But it makes life very interesting. So yes, you should always connect with your legislator, even if you don't think they're going to wind up listening to you, because you want them to know that you're watching, because yes, that matters. One of the things that I've said talking about activism broadly is if you email a legislator, even though you know it's hopeless, there's still a use for that. Because yes, it's highly possible that that legislator will not, under any circumstances, change their vote. You could never get Pete or I, for example, to not vote for like a Marcellus shale tax to fund education. I'd vote for it 12 times if I could. But if you contact and there's a lot of legislators feel the same way about issues that I think are terrible, but by emailing them repeatedly, you make that legislator more uncomfortable. That might make that legislator less likely to speak out on an issue on the floor, to put out a press release, to vote for supportive amendments, things like that. When you're trying to do activism, don't think that the goal is always to change somebody's mind and to get them to vote differently, because most of the time you really won't. But what you might do is influence how the legislator and how often the legislator communicates about an issue. That stuff matters. And I will say I'm definitely louder at moments where I think my district is really paying attention to it. No doubt about it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I like to know that, our efforts are definitely not in vain. So I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
In my district, broadly speaking, the issue that I get the most, I'll say, form emails about is broadly the environment. It's really, really interesting.
And candidly, and again, Mike and I share the same city. It is not on the top 10 things.
Really fascinating.
Yep.
Yeah, and it speaks to the differences between our districts.
I will say it's getting a little bit more run than it used to, but it's still not.
It?
A little bit.
What do you attribute that to?
Candidly, I get most of those from the new stratas.
That's what I was wondering.
One of the downtown.
That's what I was wondering.
That's where it's coming from.
All right. Well, folks, we could definitely keep going. I love this energy. I certainly appreciate the conversation that we have. So thank you, Representative Schweyer and Schlossberg, for making our night, for really giving us some insight that we certainly need.
Happy to do it again, too.
Oh, yeah, don't worry. You will.
This is the only way we get to talk to people at this point, Marie, except Pete and I going, how are you? I'm quarantined. How are you? I'm also quarantined.
Except when we're on the floor of the house and we're like quadruple masking because of our
we will double mask and these assholes won't wear a single mask. It's remarkable. And they go, why do you have two? Because you have none.
I don't know if you know this. There's a global pandemic.
Alex, that's a terrible idea. Don't do that. No.
That's just a little terrible, not even a little. That is just, wow. My nephew has to wear, and he's 2. He has to wear a mask and knows he has to put on a mask. But we will not go there, folks. I'm going to be mature. So
say whatever you want. I see space. There's no judging here.
Oh my goodness. Well, folks, I want to thank you again for your time. Again, you could have been absolutely anywhere on a Thursday evening, and you chose to prioritize the environment, and you chose to prioritize being here. So again, thank you is not enough, but thank you is what I have. But I don't know about you folks. I left this feeling that we have 2 amazing environmental champions, but we are in the minority, and that is not lost, certainly not lost on me. So this is just the beginning, right? These conversations are great, but we certainly need more action. So the way in which we are going to do so, folks, and don't worry, it'll be linked down there for you. We have an activist page on our Facebook it's through our Facebook. I want you all to be my friend on Facebook. You'll see this smiling face right here. That'll keep you abreast of all of the events that we'll be having, any issues that are prevalent in the Allentown area, the Lehigh area. So please join that Facebook group, please. We have an ACE program. It is our Penn Fuster ACE program. It is tons and tons of fun. I have 4 strong ladies that are meeting with McNeil tomorrow. We are pumping this through. But it really is another way that we hold our legislators accountable and have these types of conversations, because again, folks, it doesn't just stop with the beautiful conversation. We have to keep moving. And lastly, we will be having it with Ezra and with Kate. They left us a little early. We will be having a legislative budget meeting. That is worthwhile because how many folks here, show of hands, I know you know this because you're all political buffs. How many of you know that next week, actually, Governor Wolf will be having his budget meeting or his budget? Yeah? Show of hands. I want to see everyone's hands.
Schlossberg, that
Okay.
means you. You're going to be sitting there by me.
Well,
You're
now I know.
watching it on a video screen.
I know it's going to be so weird.
Really awkward.
At least this way, when the Republicans throw tomatoes at him, at least he doesn't need a dry cleaner.
Do you
Nah.
think Fetterman will be behind him? Like, do you think, like, you know, he's gonna be Wolf and Fetterman's gonna be like,
I hope not.
They're
Because
just making it so appetizing for you folks to want to watch it, but don't worry. Don't worry. I promise you, we will have a beautiful, comprehensive breakdown of it February 23rd at 5:30 p.m. Ezra and Katie are going to give us all the information we need to know and more action that we need to take. So the links are dropped below for you. No excuse why I'm not going to see your lovely faces again, because again, folks, this is just the start. This is the start, not our finish. So let's keep this momentum going. Let's keep going strong. Let's keep fighting, all right? I want to hear your lovely voices. I'm sorry, the teacher comes out of me. I want to hear your lovely voices. We're doing this, yes?
yay.
Yes.
Yes.
Wow.
I
All right.
appreciate you, Maria.
Thank you
Yes,
so
yes,
much.
yes.
Thank you so much, folks. If you have any more questions, please send an email. You know where to find me. You have 3 ways to find me, and I will see you all later.
Bye, folks. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tinku. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Tinku.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Susan! Oh, she left.
Thank you all. Maria, nice job.